On September 22, 2025, the world was stunned. President Ibrahim Traoré made a bold announcement, a direct investment to bring Maxwell Chikumbutso, the controversial inventor from Zimbabwe, to Ouagadougou, the heart of Africa, to develop groundbreaking energy technology. Is this a genius move, seizing the moment to free hundreds of millions from darkness, or a dangerous gamble that could drive an entire nation into a dead end? The answer will determine not only the future of Burkina Faso, but the very position of Africa on the global stage. Hit like and join us as we uncover the truth behind this shocking decision. Burkina Faso is a landlocked nation in West Africa, home to more than 20 million people. Its soil is rich, its people resilient, yet its destiny has long been chained to a single vulnerability: fuel. More than 80% of its energy comes from imported diesel and petroleum. Each time the convoys are halted at the border, every hospital, every military outpost, every school is thrown into silence. Lights flicker out, generators grind to a halt. Surgery rooms and command centers are left in the dark. This dependence is no accident. For decades, Burkina Faso's position within the global order was defined by external powers, by international lenders, by foreign fuel companies, by the dictates of Paris, Washington, and beyond. Each shortage was a reminder: sovereignty was conditional. In September 2025, that conditional future reached a breaking point. Standing before his ministers, President Ibrahim Traoré declared, "We cannot continue to live like this. Our hospitals cannot beg for diesel. Our children cannot study by candlelight. Our soldiers cannot defend a nation paralyzed by fuel shortages. We need a path beyond every framework that has bound us." His words carried more than frustration, they carried defiance. For an older American audience, imagine the spirit of Truman declaring the Marshall Plan, or Kennedy daring to put a man on the moon. It was the same language of destiny, spoken not in Washington but in Ouagadougou. That evening, his government revealed its boldest step yet: an agreement to test the controversial technologies of Maxwell Chikumbutso, the Zimbabwean inventor who claimed he could turn invisible radio waves into endless energy. For the people of Burkina Faso, the announcement was electrifying. For the world's great powers, it was alarming. And so began a chain of events that would shake not only a small West African nation, but also the very foundations of global energy politics. When the name Maxwell Chikumbutso first surfaced in African headlines, it was usually followed by skepticism. Born in Harare, Zimbabwe, Maxwell grew up in poverty. He dropped out of school at just 14, spending his teenage years in a small garage where he tinkered with wires, old radios, and discarded engines. By the time most young men his age were looking for jobs, Maxwell claimed he had built machines that defied the world's accepted science. Among his most shocking inventions was a self-charging electric vehicle capable, he said, of running thousands of miles without a charging station. Instead of plugging in, the car generated electricity through what he called a micro-energy device that harvested radio frequencies in the air. In a continent where vast regions lack even a single charging post, such a claim sounded miraculous. He also presented prototypes of radio frequency generators, small boxes that could power an entire home or military outpost. A 10-kilowatt model, he promised, could keep the lights on for hours without a drop of fuel. He even unveiled drones and radar units powered by the same principle, flying 5 times longer than those using lithium-ion batteries. And perhaps most provocative of all, he once demonstrated a television set that required no cable, no battery, and no solar panel, just the invisible waves in the atmosphere. For most scientists abroad, this was fantasy. The laws of thermodynamics, they argued, simply did not allow such a device. Journals dismissed him, universities ignored him, and Western labs scoffed. But in Ouagadougou, to President Ibrahim Traoré, Maxwell represented something different. He was not just an inventor, he was a chance. A chance to break the chains of fuel dependency, a chance to offer power to 600 million Africans still living in the dark. That conviction brought Maxwell to the underground chambers of the presidential palace on the night of September 23, 2025. Inside a concrete bunker beneath the presidential residence, surrounded by generals and advisors, Maxwell placed a compact generator on the table. Its casing was plain, no larger than a suitcase, with a small green indicator light. He flipped the switch. At first, silence. Then within 30 seconds, the chamber blazed with light. Every bulb overhead hummed alive, every console lit up. The room, once dim and cold, became radiant. A general whispered in disbelief. To do this with diesel, we would need at least 25 liters every hour. The officers glanced at one another. Some faces showed awe, others suspicion. Was this the birth of a revolution, or a trick too dangerous to trust? President Traoré's voice cut through the silence. If we master this technology, Africa will never kneel again, neither before oil nor before the IMF. The statement was more than a declaration. It was a challenge to the world order that had for decades kept Africa dependent. By dawn the next day, word had leaked. Headlines flashed across global networks. Burkina Faso tests infinite energy generator. In Washington, Paris, Beijing, and Moscow, emergency meetings were convened. Energy ministers and intelligence chiefs pored over the reports. Some dismissed it outright, others saw danger in even the possibility. US President Donald Trump, in a hypothetical commentary picked up by news outlets, thundered, "If Burkina Faso and Africa break away from the orbit of the G7, the entire 70-year order will collapse." The markets reacted faster than politicians. Brent crude prices plunged by 20% in a single day. Tech giants like Tesla, Panasonic, and CATL lost more than $150 billion in market capitalization. Investors fled fossil fuel companies, while African citizens across the continent flooded social media with one refrain: "Hope has arrived." For 600 million people still without reliable electricity, the idea that light could come not from diesel but from the very air around them was enough to spark dreams. For the world's powers, it was enough to spark fear. The morning after the bunker demonstration, whispers turned into shouts across Ouagadougou. For ordinary citizens, the prospect was almost biblical. Mothers imagined hospitals where incubators never shut down. Teachers pictured classrooms where children could read under steady light, not the smoke of kerosene lamps. Farmers wondered if grain could be stored in powered silos instead of rotting in the heat. Yet not everyone was swept away. Economists and opposition leaders cautioned that embracing an unproven technology could bankrupt the nation. If this fails, one former minister warned on state radio, we will be left isolated, mocked abroad, abandoned by lenders, and poorer than before. Even within the military, doubts lingered. Some officers feared Burkina Faso was painting a target on its back, inviting sabotage or intervention from powers unwilling to see Africa rise. But Traoré's inner circle insisted the risk was worth it. To continue relying on imports was a slow death. To gamble on Maxwell's vision was at least a chance at life. In a country that had survived coups, droughts, and decades of dependency, the debate was not simply technical, it was existential. Would Burkina Faso remain at the mercy of fuel convoys, or would it step into history as the first African nation to claim true energy sovereignty? If the mood inside Burkina Faso was divided between hope and caution, the world outside was fractured by fear. Across Africa, leaders responded in two camps. Nations like Mali, Niger, and Guinea, also weary of foreign control, voiced solidarity. Editorials in regional papers hailed Traoré as a new Mandela for the energy age. Some even suggested forming a Pan-African energy alliance, with Ouagadougou as its capital. But in Europe and North America, the tone was starkly different. Intelligence briefings in Washington labeled the technology a strategic threat. French media fumed that Burkina Faso was playing with illusions that could destabilize West Africa. Behind the scenes, the pressure was even more direct. Agents from the CIA and the French DGSE quietly made contact with Maxwell. They offered him $20 billion, an astronomical sum, in a country whose GDP barely crossed 20 billion annually. All he had to do was hand over his patents and walk away. Maxwell refused. With President Traoré at his side, he declared, "This is not for sale. This is Africa's freedom." That night, the line was drawn. No longer was this only about engineering or economics. It was about sovereignty, about whether a continent long exploited for its resources could finally control its own future. But destiny is never uncontested. On the evening of September 23rd, just hours after Maxwell's refusal, a mysterious explosion ripped through one of Ouagadougou's key laboratories. Flames consumed prototypes, documents, and years of fragile research. To many, it was confirmation that powerful forces would not allow this experiment to succeed without a fight. In Washington, the Burkina Faso experiment was not seen as a local curiosity. It was treated as a national security alarm. Intelligence analysts at the Pentagon and the State Department worked through the night, reviewing every scrap of information. Was Maxwell a fraud? Or worse, was he real? If the technology was real, the implications were staggering. America's dominance since World War II had rested on two pillars: military strength and energy control, oil routes through the Middle East, shipping lanes guarded by the US Navy, and global institutions like the IMF had kept much of the developing world tied to Washington's orbit. But if a small landlocked country in West Africa could suddenly generate endless power without fuel, the old order would crack. Entire continents could leapfrog beyond oil and lithium, bypassing the very industries where US companies and allies held sway. For US policymakers, the choices were grim. Should Washington attempt to partner with Traoré, risking the appearance of legitimizing unproven science? Should it move to discredit him, warning the world of false promises? Or should it quietly prepare for the possibility that Africa might be on the verge of independence in a way the West had never planned for? Among older Americans, especially those who remembered the Cold War, the echoes were unsettling. The question was not just about Africa's future. It was about whether the United States was witnessing the birth of a new rival age of technology, one it did not control. Beyond America, the reactions were just as divided. In Moscow, state media praised Traoré as the bold young lion who dared to challenge the West. Russian energy strategists quietly calculated how free African power could undermine OPEC markets and open doors for new alliances. In Beijing, the government took a more pragmatic line. Chinese envoys approached Ouagadougou with offers of partnership, factories, infrastructure, and access to global markets if Traoré would align with them. For Beijing, Africa's independence was not a threat, but an opportunity to weaken US dominance and expand China's Belt and Road vision. Meanwhile, in Europe, hesitation reigned. Brussels feared instability. Paris, humiliated by losing influence in its former colony, spoke of grave consequences if Burkina Faso continued down this path. Yet ordinary Europeans, weary of high energy bills, whispered, what if this technology could reach them too? International institutions, especially the IMF and World Bank, felt directly threatened. Their entire model of lending rested on nations being tied to resource scarcity. If Maxwell's generators could light entire villages without imports, the leverage of loans and interest payments would vanish overnight. This global split made Ouagadougou the new epicenter of a geopolitical earthquake. Some saw salvation, others saw disruption. But everyone understood one truth. If Burkina Faso proved the technology worked, the balance of power in the 21st century would never be the same. For Africa's poor, the idea of free energy meant dignity and hope. For the world's powers, it meant danger and disorder. The choice was no longer between skepticism and belief, it was between acceptance and resistance. On the night of September 23rd, as the world debated whether Burkina Faso had just changed history, disaster struck. A sudden explosion ripped through one of Ouagadougou's main laboratories, where Maxwell's devices were being assembled. The fireball lit the night sky, windows shattered across nearby streets. By dawn, the site was reduced to twisted metal and smoke. The loss was devastating. Prototypes were destroyed. Technical notes, fragile research, and months of testing were reduced to ashes. Some whispered that it was sabotage, a strike by unseen hands who could not allow Africa to break free. Others claimed it was proof of incompetence, that the so-called generators were unstable and dangerous. Maxwell himself barely survived. Pulled from the rubble with burns on his hands, he appeared shaken but resolute. Standing before cameras later that day, he declared, "You can destroy our labs, but you cannot destroy an idea whose time has come." For the international press, the explosion deepened the mystery. Was this a cover-up, a hoax unraveling, or the first battle in what could become the fiercest technology war of the century? Yet even as smoke lingered over the ruined lab, another image captured the world's attention. Deep beneath the presidential palace, in the same bunker where it had first stunned the generals, Maxwell's suitcase-sized generator was still running. Its soft green glow illuminated a map of Africa pinned to the wall. President Ibrahim Traoré stood beside the inventor, hand resting on the table, gaze fixed on that glowing continent. Cameras recorded the moment. A young African leader and a defiant scientist, united not by wealth or military might, but by an idea that freedom could be powered not by oil fields or foreign loans, but by energy drawn from the very air. The symbolism was impossible to ignore. Across social media, the image was shared with captions like, "Africa will not kneel," and "Light against darkness." For many, it became the defining photograph of the decade. Diplomats and generals saw it differently. They saw a continent on the brink of revolt against the old order. They saw the spark of a conflict that could engulf markets, alliances, and perhaps even battlefields. But for the people of Burkina Faso, the sight of that glowing light was enough. It proved that even in the face of fire, betrayal, and destruction, their leader had not surrendered. The generator hummed on, and so did their hope. As the dust slowly settled over Ouagadougou, one undeniable truth remained. Burkina Faso had dared to dream. Against every odd, against the weight of history and the suspicion of powerful nations, a small landlocked country had stood up and declared that its destiny would no longer be dictated by others. The demonstration in that concrete bunker may have ended in flames and smoke. Skeptics laughed, experts scoffed, and global institutions shook their heads. Powerful outsiders whispered threats, warning of chaos if the vision spread. Yet even in the ashes, the idea itself refused to die. The vision lived on in the hearts of millions who had watched, in the chants that rose outside the presidential palace, and in the hope that spread like wildfire across a continent long denied its rightful place in the modern world. For too long, Burkina Faso had been a footnote in global headlines, a nation of coups, droughts, and poverty. Yet now, in that fleeting moment, it had become something more, a symbol of defiance, of possibility. A young president, Ibrahim Traoré, and a self-taught inventor, Maxwell Chikumbutso, stood shoulder to shoulder, proclaiming to the world that Africa's destiny would no longer be written in the boardrooms of foreign banks, or in the contracts of oil companies, or in the shadow of IMF dictates. For ordinary Africans, the image of those two men in the underground chamber became a promise carved into memory. It was the promise that the 600 million people still living without electricity might one day live with light, not light controlled by distant corporations, but light born from their own soil, their own sky, their own ingenuity. Mothers saw visions of hospitals where incubators never switched off. Students dreamed of classrooms glowing late into the night. Farmers imagined silos powered against the burning heat, preserving grain that once rotted away. And for the rest of the world, the same image carried an entirely different weight. It became a warning that the old order, carefully constructed for 70 years, could crack and crumble the moment the powerless discovered new strength. In Washington, policymakers asked if this was the beginning of a second independence across Africa. In Paris, whispers spread that centuries of influence were slipping away. In Beijing and Moscow, officials studied the reports carefully, wondering whether a new front in the global struggle for power had just been opened. The question now extends far beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Do you believe that President Ibrahim Traoré's bold strategies are the spark of Africa's awakening? Or will the world's great powers crush his vision before it has even had the chance to shine? Should Americans see him as a partner in progress, someone daring to break the chains of dependency, or as a challenge to the stability and order they have known for 70 years? History has always turned on moments like this, when the weak stood against the strong, when new voices demanded to be heard, when ideas once dismissed as impossible forced their way into reality. And history will not only record what happened in Ouagadougou, it will remember what side we chose. President Traoré's own words still echo like the steady beat of a drum across the red earth of the Sahel. "We did not ask for permission to be free, we stood up to claim it." Those words now belong not just to Burkina Faso, but to every African who dreams of sovereignty, and to every citizen of the world who believes freedom is never given, it is taken, it is earned, it is lived. If you believe that the courage of Ibrahim Traoré is the voice of Africa rising for freedom, then share this story. Let the world hear it. And if you believe that truth matters more than the headlines written in the capitals of the powerful, then subscribe, stand with us, and follow this journey. May God bless Burkina Faso. May God bless Africa. And may the light of freedom once sparked in a bunker beneath Ouagadougou never be extinguished.